I need a man with real influence, real presence, and real connections, my girlfriend said before leaving me for someone older and wealthier. I quietly let her walk away. 11 months later, she arrived at an exclusive event only to discover I was the person hosting the entire evening. "You're brilliant in your own way," Brooke said, setting her wine glass down with the kind of careful precision that people use when they're about to say something they've rehearsed. "But you don't move through the world the way I need someone to move through it." I remember the silence after that sentence. Not the painful kind. Not the kind where you scramble for a response, where your chest caves in and your voice cracks. Just quiet. The ambient noise of the restaurant filling the space between us. Someone laughing 2 tables over. Ice shifting in a glass somewhere behind me. I looked at her. She looked slightly past me. "What does that mean?" I asked. She picked up her wine again. Took a sip. "It means I need someone with real influence. Real presence. Real connections. The kind that opens rooms, not just doors." There was something she didn't know about me yet. I almost told her that night. Instead, I nodded slowly, folded my napkin, and said, "Okay." 11 months later, she walked into a room where my name was printed on every single invitation. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. We'd been together for 2 years and 4 months when that dinner happened. I was 31. She was 28. We'd met at a mutual friend's gallery opening in Chelsea, the kind of event where the wine is expensive and the art is deliberately confusing, and nobody admits they don't understand either. She was wearing something red, standing with the quiet confidence of someone who believed she belonged in every room she entered. I liked that about her then. Brooke was a luxury brand consultant. Her entire professional identity was built around the language of aspiration. What signals wealth? What signals taste? What separates the merely successful from the genuinely elite? She was good at her job because she believed in it completely. She didn't just understand the aesthetics of status. She felt them. I worked in private capital advisory, connecting early-stage companies with the right investors, helping high-net-worth individuals structure deals that didn't need to be public, facilitating introductions between people who preferred their influence quiet. I didn't talk about it much. That was my first mistake, apparently. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It started maybe 8 months in, when she began getting invited to events through a client named Gavin, late 40s, managing partner at some boutique real estate investment firm, the kind of man who wore his wealth like a second skin, effortlessly visible. Gavin had a penthouse in Tribeca, a standing table at Carbone, and the easy magnetism of someone who had never once in his adult life been made to feel small. Brooke started mentioning him the way people mention the weather. Casually. Repeatedly. Gavin took his whole team to Nobu last night for a Thursday dinner. Just because. Gavin got us into that private screening at the Whitby. You'd have loved it. I noticed the us. I didn't say anything about it. That should have been my first warning. By the 10-month mark, she'd started attending events I wasn't invited to, or wasn't told about until after. Not always with Gavin specifically, sometimes with a broader circle that had formed around him. A charity gala on the Upper East Side. A rooftop launch party for some new financial technology platform. A private dinner at a boutique hotel in Midtown where the guest list apparently included 2 senators and a former Treasury official. She'd come home lit up, energized, talking about conversations she'd had, impressions she'd made, names she'd exchanged numbers with. And then she'd look at me, sitting on our couch, laptop open, working on a term sheet or reviewing a client's portfolio structure, and I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. She never said it out loud during those months, but I felt it. There was one night in particular. We were at a dinner party at a friend's place in the West Village, Jenna's apartment, cramped and warm, the kind of gathering where people sit on countertops because there aren't enough chairs. Jenna was a documentary filmmaker. Her friends were artists and journalists and mid-level creatives, and the conversation was genuine, if not glamorous. At some point, someone asked what I did. I gave my usual answer. Private capital advisory. Connecting capital with opportunity, mostly in the early stage and growth space. Brooke was across the room. I saw her expression without meaning to. It wasn't embarrassment exactly. It was something quieter, a kind of resigned flatness, like she'd hoped for a different answer and had learned to stop hoping. Later, in the cab home, she was scrolling her phone. "You could say it with more confidence," she said, not looking up. "Say what?" "What you do. You talk about it like it's something you apologize for. I wasn't apologizing. You weren't owning it either. I looked out the window. The city moved past, indifferent. I own it fine, I said. She didn't respond. And looking back, I think that was the moment she'd already decided something. The dinner 2 weeks later was almost a formality. But I want to tell you about what happened in between. Because there's a part of this story that Brooke never had access to, and it matters. 3 days after that cab ride, I flew to San Francisco for 2 days for a quiet meeting with a group of venture partners I'd been introduced to through a contact named Wyatt. One of those people who exists at the intersection of finance and technology in a way that's hard to describe. Wyatt was a former Goldman Sachs managing director who transitioned into private equity, built a network that spanned 3 continents, and had been, for the past 2 years, one of my most important professional relationships. He'd introduced me to his circle gradually, not because I'd asked, because somewhere along the way he'd decided my instincts were worth investing in. The meeting in San Francisco was about a Series B restructure for a climate infrastructure company. The round was oversubscribed, the terms were sensitive, and they needed someone who could handle discretion as fluently as they handled numbers. I came back to New York with a new client relationship, a quiet fee arrangement, and 3 introductions that would matter enormously over the following year. I didn't tell Brooke any of this. Not because I was hiding it, because it didn't occur to me that it needed to be said. That was just work. That was just Tuesday. I almost told her. That same week. I remember sitting at the kitchen table thinking, maybe if she understood the full picture. But I stayed quiet. The dinner where she said what she said was on a Wednesday. I remember because I'd come from a long call with a family office out of Connecticut, 3 generations of inherited wealth, very specific ideas about risk, an allocation decision that had been pending for 6 weeks. I was tired in the way that accumulates, not dramatically. We sat down. She'd chosen the restaurant, which was fine. It was nice. The kind of place where the lighting is engineered to make everyone look successful. For the first 20 minutes, we talked about nothing significant. Her client workload, a renovation happening in the apartment above mine. And then she set the glass down with that careful precision. You're brilliant in your own way, but you don't move through the world the way I need someone to move through it. Real influence, real presence, real connections. I thought about the family office call, about Wyatt, about San Francisco. I said, okay. She blinked. Okay. I mean, I hear you. I understand what you're saying. You're not going to argue? What would arguing accomplish? She looked at me for a long moment, and I think part of her was waiting for something. A plea, a defense, some emotional eruption that would at least confirm she was worth fighting for. I didn't give her that. Not because I didn't care, because something in me had already accepted what this conversation meant. Not just about us, about everything that followed. I didn't realize it then, I'll say now, but that conversation changed the direction of my entire life. She was with Gavin within 3 weeks. She didn't announce it. She didn't need to. We had a mutual circle through Jenna and a few other people, and information like that moves on its own. By the time she subtly updated her Instagram with photos from a weekend in the Hamptons, Gavin's house, recognizably, if you knew what to look for, I already knew. I watched it happen the way you watch weather from inside a warm building. Aware of it, not destroyed by it. The photos were deliberate. The caption wasn't even clever. Good company, good light. But she had 3,000 followers now, up from 800 4 months ago, and Gavin's social orbit had clearly accelerated that. She was tagging restaurants I recognized, events I hadn't known she'd been invited to. She was building a public story about herself. I was building something entirely different. Here is what those 11 months looked like from my side. The week after the breakup, I called Wyatt and told him I was restructuring my schedule and availability. He asked if everything was fine. I said yes. He said, good, because I want you at something in October. Private gathering, 40 people, all principals. You'll want to be there. I said I'd be there. In June, one of my early stage clients, a logistics software company I'd helped connect with an investor group 14 months earlier, completed a modest acquisition. My role in that deal wasn't public. It didn't need to be, but the principals involved remembered. We met for coffee on a Tuesday morning in the West Village, 30 feet from a coffee shop Brooke and I used to go to on weekends. I didn't think about that. Blake had an idea he'd been sitting on for 8 months, a curated networking event for what he called people who don't need to be networked. Private equity, family offices, a few high-caliber operators, a select group of advisors. Not a conference, not a panel, A room of people who already knew how things worked, gathering to talk about what came next. He wanted to structure it as a quarterly event series. He wanted someone who could handle the curation, the relationships, the behind-the-scenes architecture. Someone who understood both the capital side and the human side. He'd heard I was that person from two sources whose opinions he trusted. I told him I was interested. We shook hands on a Tuesday morning. That handshake, looking back, is where everything converged. By September, I was deep into the logistics of the first event. It wasn't glamorous from the outside, the preparation work, I mean. It was spreadsheets and phone calls and very careful thinking about who should be in a room with whom, and why, and what the right sequence of introductions would be. It was understanding that the value of an event like this isn't in what happens at the event. It's in the trust established before anyone arrives. Wyatt helped open the first tier of invitations. Blake handled the second tier. I curated the rest through my own network. People I'd worked with quietly, people who'd heard my name from clients, people who'd been waiting for a context in which to meet a particular kind of person. We kept the guest list at 50. No press. No social media documentation. No velvet rope theater. The exclusivity wasn't performative. It was functional. The venue was a private event space on the 42nd floor of a building in Midtown. Not a hotel, not a club, something quieter. Floor-to-ceiling windows. The skyline doing exactly what Manhattan skylines do at night. A room designed to feel like a serious conversation was already happening before you walked in. My name wasn't on a flashy banner. It was on the invitations. As host, I designed them myself. I should mention, I had no idea she would be there. I found out 4 days before the event, from Jenna of all people, who called to double-check that she wasn't about to cause a situation by RSVPing yes to a client event she'd been invited to as a +1. I asked who's +1. She hesitated. Gavin. He's one of Blake's LP relationships, apparently. And he and Brooke are. They've been. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't going to be weird for you. I was quiet for a moment. It's fine, I said. Are you sure? Because I can. Jenna. It's fine. I set the phone down. Sat with it for about 30 seconds. Then opened my laptop and went back to the seating configuration. The night of the event, I arrived early. I'm always early to things I care about. Not frantically early. Just there before the energy shifts, before the room stops being a quiet space and starts being a social environment. I walked the floor, checked the table layouts, confirmed the catering timeline, spoke to the venue coordinator, greeted the 2 bartenders by name. Blake arrived at 6:45, 30 minutes before the first guests. He found me standing at the window with a glass of water, looking out at the city. You look calm, he said. I am calm. I'm nervous, he admitted. Is that strange? You've been to hundreds of events like this. Not ones I built from scratch. He paused. Not ones where I picked everyone in the room. I looked at him. Everyone you picked earned their invitation. That should feel like confidence, not nerves. He nodded, adjusted his jacket. Right. By 7:15, the room had the quality I'd hoped for. Conversation was immediate, unforced. Nobody was performing. People who'd heard each other's names for years were finally meeting, and I could see in their faces that the introductions landed correctly. The right context, the right framing. I'd thought about every single one of them. I saw Gavin arrive at 7:38. Not because I was watching the door, because he's the kind of person who occupies a room audibly, the greeting energy, the backslapping, the immediate performance of ease. He came in with a small group, said something loud enough to generate laughter at the entrance. Brooke was beside him. She was wearing black, understated, well-fitted. Her hair was different from when I'd known her, shorter, more polished. She looked exactly like someone who'd spent the better part of a year curating a version of herself for rooms like this one. She was looking at the room the way she always looked at new environments. That rapid social calculation, reading the hierarchy, figuring out who mattered. Then her eyes moved to the large printed invitation framed near the entrance. The formal version, the one Blake had wanted displayed as a kind of elegant statement piece. Clean typography, ivory stock, the event name, the date, and at the bottom, in clean letters. Hosted by, and my name. I watched her read it. I watched her stop. The pause was maybe 4 seconds. But I've thought about those 4 seconds many times since. She turned slowly and found me across the room. I was in a conversation with 2 investors from different firms who'd never met, but who I'd suspected would immediately understand each other's work. I'd been right. They were deep into something. leaning slightly toward each other the way people do when they've forgotten there are other people in the room. I glanced past them and found Brooke's eyes. She was still standing near the entrance. Gavin was already 3 conversations deep, entirely in his element. She was not in her element. I nodded at her, the way you nod at a familiar face across a room at a professional event. Polite, calm, nothing more. I went back to my conversation. Here's what I noticed, without trying to notice it. She spent the first 20 minutes close to Gavin, which made sense. He was her anchor in the room. But Gavin, for all his visible confidence, was an LP here. He was a guest. People were polite to him, warm even, but the gravitational center of the room was somewhere else. People came to me. Wyatt found me at 8 and gripped my shoulder and said, quietly, "You built something real tonight." I thanked him. A founder I'd helped 2 years ago appeared and said, "I need 10 minutes with you before the night ends. I have something I want to run by you." I said, "Of course." Blake's business partner, a measured, observant woman named Paige who I'd only met twice before, pulled me aside near the bar and said, "Blake told me you curated every introduction in this room. I want to understand how you think. Can we have lunch next week?" I said yes. Brooke was watching all of this. Not obviously. She was too socially intelligent to be obvious about it. But I'd spent 2 years learning the particular quality of her attention, and I recognized it when I felt it. The moment that crystallized everything happened around 9 o'clock. There was a brief pause in the formal programming. Blake had wanted to say a few words midway through, and as people shifted and gathered, Gavin made his way to me for the first time. He extended a hand. Confident, measured. He didn't seem embarrassed. "We haven't officially met. Gavin, I know who you are," I said, shaking his hand. "Blake speaks highly of your work. And I've been hearing about you all evening," he said, with the faint surprise of someone recalibrating. "More than I expected. The network's been good to me." He nodded. Something in him had shifted from the entrance energy. The room had told him something about me that he hadn't come in expecting to hear. "Good event," he said. "Thank you." He moved on, and standing 6 feet away, holding a glass of champagne she'd barely touched, was Brooke. Blake said his few words. Short, genuine, the kind of gratitude that lands because it isn't performed. He mentioned the curatorial work behind the room. He said, "None of this exists without the person who understood, from the beginning, that the right 50 people are worth more than the right 500. He didn't say my name. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room already knew it. I watched Brooke hear this, watched her process it, watched something move across her expression that I couldn't fully name. Not jealousy exactly. More like the specific vertigo of realizing you made a calculation that was missing crucial information. She found me at 9:45, when the event was winding toward its natural close and conversations had loosened into the comfortable, unhurried register of a successful evening. "Hi," she said. "Hey." The word carried nothing. Not coldness. I wasn't cold. Just level. The way you are with someone who exists in your past. "I didn't know," she said, "that I was hosting any of it. I didn't know any of this was." She gestured slightly at the room, then seemed to catch herself gesturing and stopped. "It's just work," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Her expression was careful in the way that careful expressions are when someone is working very hard not to let you see what they're feeling underneath. "You never talked about any of this," she said, "when we were together." "No. Why not?" I thought about that for a second. Genuinely. "Because it never seemed like what you were interested in," I said. "You wanted visible. This isn't visible." She absorbed that. "The people in this room," she said quietly. "Who are they?" "People who don't need to explain who they are," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. Someone called my name from across the room. A fund manager I needed to close a conversation with before he left, and I looked toward them briefly, then back at her. "It was good to see you, Brooke," I said. I said it like I meant it. And then I walked away. I want to be honest about what I felt for the rest of that night, because I think the honest version matters more than the clean version. I didn't feel triumphant. Not really. That would require caring more about her presence in the room than I actually did. And the truth is that by the time she arrived, I had moved far enough forward that the evening existed entirely on its own terms. Not as a response to her, not as proof of anything. Just as a thing I'd built because it was worth building. There was something, though. A quiet clarity. The sense that a loop had closed somewhere, not dramatically, but finally. Wyatt found me near the end, as people were beginning to collect their things. He had a glass of scotch and the satisfied expression of a man who'd watched something he believed in pay off. "I heard she was here tonight," he said. "She was. And nothing," I said. "She was just someone in the room." He looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "Good," he said. In the weeks that followed, Jenna told me pieces. She told me Brooke had been quiet in the car home, that Gavin had been in a good mood, the evening had been professionally useful to him, and Brooke had barely spoken, that she'd asked Jenna later what exactly my work involved and how it had generated this kind of room. Jenna had told her, accurately, the client work, the network, the years of quiet relationship building in a world where relationships were the only currency that mattered, the acquisition that had brought Blake into my orbit, the event series that was now in planning for its second quarter. Jenna said Brooke had listened to all of it without saying much. Then, at the end, I didn't see it. Jenna told her, kindly, that it wasn't the kind of thing you could see from the outside. That was probably the truest thing anyone said about any of it. I ran into Molly at a coffee shop 3 weeks later, an old colleague who'd known both of us during the relationship, someone whose company I'd always liked. She sat down across from me without being asked and said, "I heard about the event. The whole story." "There isn't really a story," I said. She smiled. "There's always a story. You're just the kind of person who refuses to perform it." I thought about that. She thought she was upgrading, Molly said. Not cruelly, just matter-of-factly, in the way that people who've known you for a while can be matter-of-fact. She was looking for visible proof that someone had arrived. "And you were." "Already there," I said. "Already there," she agreed. We sat with that for a moment. Then she asked about the second event, and I told her about it, and the conversation moved forward the way all good conversations do. "I need to tell you something about the kind of influence Brooke was looking for, because I think it's important. She wasn't wrong that it exists. The Gavins of the world exist. The visible wealth, the commanding presence, the name dropped into conversations. All of that is real, and it moves through certain social circles with genuine force. I'm not dismissing it. But there's another kind. Quieter, less photogenic. The kind that lives in the call you get when something sensitive needs handling. The introduction someone makes on your behalf because your name carries weight they've never seen you claim publicly. The room that gets built because people trust your judgment about who should be in it. Brooke was trained to see the first kind. Her whole professional vocabulary was about it. Aspiration, signal, status, image. She was brilliant at reading surfaces. She just never learned to read what was underneath them. And I, for whatever combination of temperament and professional habit, had spent years becoming fluent in exactly that. She didn't leave a man without influence. She left a man whose influence she didn't have the language to recognize. The second event was in January. 60 people this time. Blake had wanted to expand slightly, and the quality of interest after the first evening had been extraordinary. We'd turned down more requests than we'd accepted, which was the point. I remember standing in the same space. We'd booked the same venue because the room had worked, and feeling the density of what had been built. Not just the event, the architecture under it. The network of trust and discretion and carefully placed value that now had my name on it, quietly, in the way things that last tend to operate. Wyatt was there. Blake. Page. The founder I'd talked to in October, who'd brought a new connection from his last round of fundraising. A family office representative from Chicago who'd heard about the first event from 2 different people and called me directly in November. None of them needed to know my story to trust the room. The room told them. I never ran into Brooke again. Not directly. Jenna mentioned, some months later, that she and Gavin had ended things. Amicably. The way relationships that were always about orbit rather than attachment tend to end. That Brooke had moved into consulting work with a different client base, something less purely luxury-focused, more substantive. That she seemed, according to Jenna, more grounded. I was glad to hear that. I mean that sincerely. The version of Brooke I'd known wasn't a bad person. She was someone who'd built a set of values around what she could see, and lived inside them completely. The problem with that architecture is that the invisible things eventually make themselves known. Sometimes through someone else's event. Sometimes just through time. I'm telling this story not because of her. I want to be clear about that. I'm telling it because there's something in it I think is worth understanding. The gap between what influence looks like and what it actually is. The years I spent in rooms where nothing was performed, where the value was entirely in the quality of the thinking and the trust and the long, slow, unsexy work of becoming someone whose judgment people would pay for and build around. Those years looked like nothing from the outside. They looked like a guy on a couch with a laptop. They looked like a quiet answer at a dinner party. They looked like someone who didn't need to explain himself. And then the room filled up with the 50 right people, and my name was on the invitations, and someone important in every conversation that evening already knew who I was before we met. That's not a fairy tale. That's just what it looks like when the work is real and the patience is longer than most people's attention span. The last thing I want to tell you is this. Months after the second event, I was having dinner with Blake and his wife and Paige and her husband, the kind of low-key evening among people who'd become genuine friends through professional proximity. Good food, easy conversation, nobody performing anything. At some point, Blake's wife asked me, with the genuine curiosity of someone who didn't know the full backstory, "Was there a moment when you knew this was going to become what it became?" Like a single point. I thought about it. I thought about the restaurant. The careful precision of a glass being set down. The words that followed. "Yeah," I said. "There was." "What happened?" I picked up my glass. Looked at the table for a second. "Someone told me I didn't have the kind of presence they were looking for," I said. And I let them walk away. Blake's wife looked at me. "That doesn't sound like a beginning. That sounds like a loss." "They're usually the same thing," I said. She considered that. Nodded slowly. The conversation moved on. She spent 11 months looking for a room that would prove someone had made it. She just didn't realize she'd already left the person who was building one.